All right, cool. The word has been spread. Morning, everybody. Awesome. Yeah, I see a lot of familiar faces. Code contributors. Good to see you guys. This up. Been looking forward to chatting with everybody. I know he's collected a ton of questions from the community, so I think we'll be going through a bunch of those today.
All right. Yeah, it looks like we got the recording bot as well. So it should be recorded for anybody listening in later. Doing a little post-launch AMA. Anton, just checking again if your mic's in there. Can everyone hear us? Okay, I guess Anton just types recorded. All right.
Loud and clear.
Okay, that's good. So let's maybe David, if you want to give just maybe an overview of what happened in the last couple of days, what happened last week with the launch, maybe give us just a bit of context, and then we can get into some questions and answers about basically what happened. Last week we saw the capital providers were able to claim some more. The liquidity pool was made of more, and the code contributors were also able to claim. So if you could just maybe kick us off with a bit of context and where exactly we're at, and then we could get into some cues about the technical stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, happy to do it. So I think as probably most people know here, the end of the bootstrapping period was May 8th. That's when more token claiming went live. The community started claiming their more, set up Uniswap pools. Meanwhile, the yield that had been collected during those 90 days was deployed into the pool as both the more tokens and the staked ETH was converted to WETH. And so the Uniswap pool is WETH and the more tokens. And so, that whole day, price discovery started, and as the liquidity got added in, it seems like the market has sort of really stabilized around the like $60 to $100 kind of range, which in ETH terms is around 0.025. And it's been really cool to see the liquidity mechanism that was described in MRC 9 really sort of work as intended, right? It created demand on the bottom side and lots of supply of more sort of above the trading range. And so we're seeing like $500,000 million a day of daily trading volume. I think there's about $7 million of liquidity in the Uniswap pool, which is really great, right? It's kind of been bouncing around that range ever since the liquidity went live, and it's really cool validation of the whole, concept of doing the fair launch and, gathering the liquidity, deploying that, and everybody able to, openly participate in that process is really great. So yeah, huge thanks to the community and everybody that worked on the testing. The testing, was done actually on Arbitrum because Uniswap had some issues with operations on testnet, and so big thanks to everybody who tested it on Arbitrum before it went live. And so yeah, it's cool now that more tokens have a price. It's been interesting. Since MOR tokens went live, the staked ETH bottomed out at about 103,000. And now has been ticking up almost every day. I think it's at 112,000 staked ETH now, right? And I guess that just shows that people, are still excited about earning more tokens by providing the yield from their staked ETH. Ryan put up a great stat on morelord.com, which I love. That interface gives so many statistics about the community and the more tokens and all the claiming going on and the different emissions, the different buckets. But the really great one is you can now see what the APY is, right? So at the current trading range, it's implying 25, 27% APY ETH on ETH, which is great. So it'll be interesting to see if that continues to attract more staked ETH in order to people are competing and earning that more, right? Now that deposits are live, withdrawals are live, and claims are live, it's sort of the full cycle now that people can have high confidence. They put ETH in, if they contribute the yield, they'll earn this more, and then they have a liquid market. So yeah, it's been a whirlwind. A lot of us have been traveling for different Morpheus community events. Just the other day, Brian Bougeri in Puerto Rico put on a really cool event called Free AI Day. And myself and Ryan, Matt McKibben, other members of the community were all there talking about Morpheus and the importance of decentralized AI to the community there in San Juan. And if everybody's familiar with Puerto Rico, there's a really big Web3 community there of builders and people that have worked on a lot of the protocols. So that was really cool. And now kind of everybody's ramping up for consensus coming up at the end of the month. So yeah, that's kind of like the where everything's at, the update from the last week. And I just posted, I think it was yesterday, sort of what's next. And so if you didn't see that announcement, check it out. But I listed out like the next 9 or 10 things that different open source contributors are working on, right? We just saw the more 20 contracts get put into the GitHub repo the other day. Those are being sent to auditors now. The dashboard for more 20, so you're going to be able to create a more 20 fair launch with no code. You're just going to push a button and fill out a form on a website and a dashboard. And hopefully that's about another 2 weeks, and you'll be able to just test and launch a project even without having a ton of coding or development skills. So that's like kind of one of the next big things that everybody's looking forward to, right? We saw the announcement of Noun Space is going to launch a more 20 project, and there's a bunch of others. If you look at the ecosystem page that the folks at more.org put up, right? There's a ton of different projects on there that are involved in the Morpheus ecosystem in one way or another. So yeah, there's so much going on. It's almost hard to keep track of. But I think that's the cool thing, is because you don't have a centralized entity. Everybody's free to do their own events. Everybody's free to build whatever they want, right, on the protocol. And honestly, I've never seen a project sort of grow so fast or so organically, but I think it's just sort of a testament to the permissionless nature of what we're building here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very, very fascinating to see all the different aspects and kind of ends and tentacles of Morpheus with so many different people just developing and building different things, especially all the different dashboards, all the, we got the Dune analytics going on, we got the Parsec, things where you could actually even track what's happening with the contract that's buying, what's happening with the LP position. There definitely is a lot. I do have some questions that we've collected now. We're going to have some time also if anybody wants to come up and speak. So I'll just do a bit of questions that have been gathered in the server, and then we'll do some live questions if you want. Raise your hand and getting into some in the chat. But before that, I wanted to just ask too, about we had 2 of these liquidity events where the contract it's adding ETH back in and it's buying some more. I want to know if you could just speak on that a little bit for anybody who, I know me personally, I'm not super deep into the, providing liquidity in Uniswap world, but I see the mechanism and what it's doing is collecting the fees from the swap from the LP position and then using those fees to buy the token back. And maybe if you could just briefly go over that a little bit, and then I can get into some of these other questions.
Sure. Yeah, happy to speak to that. So the concept of protocol-owned liquidity is pretty critical to sort of how Morpheus functions, right? It's not just the LP fees, but the yield coming from the staked ETH, right? Which, let's say it's 3% a year. If there's $400 million staked, that's $12 million a year of ETH that's available to buy more out of the pool. About 50% of it is used to buy more tokens out of the pool. And then the rest is kept as ETH, and they're both added as liquidity positions into the Arbitrum Uniswap pool. And the important thing that does is it creates demand and liquidity for the token. So it doesn't matter if you earned your more from providing code, or when the compute aspects go live, you earned it that way, or you're a builder in the community releasing smart agents and you earned it that way. All those people are going to be able to get liquidity and buy or sell more tokens very easily because of that protocol and liquidity. It's a demand, it's a sink for the tokens, right? That is constantly buying these tokens out of the pool and adding it as back in as protocol and liquidity, right? And so that's really important because it's effectively a bootstrapping mechanism that keeps adding more and more depth, more and more volume, right? Which allows bigger players to be able to participate in the community, right? And be involved and give everybody liquidity that's earned more in different ways. So yeah, it's cool to see that. There's been two liquidity generation events now. Basically, the yield is collected once a week, and it does that purchase of more and then adds the liquidity positions in. And part of the open source development that's being done is automating that process, right? So now that's handled by the multi-sig signers, but that'll be automated because every project that launches with more 20 and has this same mechanism for protocol and liquidity will need that automation. So it's just sort of a good thing to develop.
Very nice. And actually, the first question is about more 20. What is it and how does it work? And there's a lot of documentation around it, but this is just a question from the community. How will more 20 work and how to apply to use it? So how did the Noun DAO kind of make this application to use this protocol, and maybe an overview of what it is?
So that's the cool thing is more 20 in of itself is permissionless. So anybody will, go to the dashboard or, interact with the factory contract and basically create a daughter contract that is a copy of the same fair launch smart contracts that Morpheus used, right? Allowing their community to add in staked ETH, collect the yield, and put that into protocol and liquidity to bootstrap their project, right? And so there's no application process. There's nobody's permission to ask. You don't need to go to a committee or take a vote. Anybody is free to use the more 20 contract, and they're in there right now in GitHub. If you go to the more 20 repo, Morpheus AI's GitHub, you'll see the latest contracts in the dev branch, and they're still being upgraded, like I said, and audited. But I expect that'll all sort of wrap up in the next coming weeks, and anybody will be able to deploy this. The benefit from the Morpheus community is 35 basis points of the yield flow back into the Morpheus protocol and liquidity. So what that means is if the project is collecting 3% a year in yield, 0.35% of that 3 go back into the Morpheus community to fund more smart contracts, to fund more dashboards, to fund more audits, right? To fund more interfaces for the ecosystem, right? And so it's very similar to the model if you looked at something like Uniswap, right? Anybody could fork their own version of Uniswap, but people would rather just pay, the LP fees and the protocol fee because, they get the benefit of the audits and the smart contracts and the dashboards and all of the network effect of the people that, already know about Uniswap, right? And so that's a really cool mechanism and will make it scalable for any project that wants to do a fair launch, right? I think the Noun space, when I say their fair launch, they've said June or July for their date, because they're still in the process of building their community and building out their cool front end for fidgets and for Farcaster, profiles and all that kind of stuff. But they've made a lot of cool proposals about how to loop that into smart agents, and build that on top of different parts of the Morpheus ecosystem. So yeah, that's kind of the high level summary on more 20. If you want to dig into the weeds, there's a whole page dedicated to it on more.org.
Very nice. I'm checking the chat here. Good. I want to get to some other questions about the testnet coming up. So it was mentioned that be a test net soon. We're going to be trying out the compute. And so some of the questions are, what are the minimum hardware requirements? What are the like minimum hardware requirements to become a compute provider? But also, is there, one question, do we have to get whitelisted, which is going to be no, because Morpheus is permissionless. And who can participate in these test nets? So maybe just I think those kind of answer themselves, but generally, what can we expect with the test net? And do we have any like hardware requirements for GPU or cores that they need, or is there any information around that from the early development side?
That sounds like a great question for Ryan.
Yeah, I'll jump in here on this one. So the smart contracts are already deployed out on Arbitrum testnet for Sepolia. It's using a diamond proxy pattern. It consists of the provider registry, the agent registry, the model registry, the marketplace, and the session router contract. So it's a pretty robust set of code that was deployed. We are getting it ready for auditing. So we're getting final internal checks and balances on it. And we'll have that out to auditors hopefully within the next week. So actually connecting with the developers later today on that one. But the test net, as far as the core node software, you can run it really on any laptop, any PC. It's a pretty lightweight proxy routing system. As long as it has access to the internet, access to a blockchain or the Arbitrum blockchain, you should be able to pull down the routes to the different providers and open up a session and stream the compute. Now, if you want to be a compute provider, once again, we're not requiring any hardware constraints. But you will quickly ruin your reputation as a provider if you try to provide a large model on a less than optimal device. So part of registering as a provider is locking up more token in the provider registry. So it does incentivize you to be a good actor in the network, but we're not constraining the system to any resource requirements.
Okay, so it's more based on what the network needs. Like if you're, it becomes a kind of a free market for a compute as well. That you're not saying there's a minimum to get in, but if you are in, you have a computer that has two cores, then you probably won't do well in the market as opposed to can you get in or not.
Yep, and this is one of the key tenets that we're trying to follow very closely as a Morpheus community, is no central point of failure and trying to keep it as decentralized and market driven as possible. There's a lot of projects out there that will do run hardware specs, and they'll look at how much storage you have, and they'll do a lot of like internal things, and those are great tools. But we don't want to make those constraints on the Morpheus node itself. So other people in the community can come along and they can provide those tools as other layers underneath the Morpheus node, and that's perfectly great. But we want to keep that outside of the actual network itself, keeping the network as lightweight and open as possible.
Okay, nice. That actually makes me think about a project that maybe someone can take on if they're interested, where there's more and more of this distributed computing protocols happening, and maybe there's a way for compute to have smaller processing to pool together their resources so that anybody who has a small machine could help out, but they're pooling themselves together, and so they don't have to maybe worry so much about having a large amount of more stake in case they get slashed or something. Do you think that could be some kind of possibility that's like someone could build something like that, pooling a bunch of smaller computes together and having like some kind of group key basically or something?
Yeah, it sounds awfully a lot like a mining pool model from the Bitcoin world. So we will see patterns like this emerge. It's outside the scope of what we're working on right now, but we're really excited about seeing other members of the community coming along and really pioneering these type of systems.
Okay, nice. Well, another question for you then, Ryan, about the test net is some people are asking, will it be incentivized, and how will the staking of more work? Like, will you be able to earn more from staking more? Is the staking of more separate from running a node and having like basically a bond? So, what are you thinking about with incentivizing the test net? Which I think I answered the other day. I don't think that's really uh, going to be happening the same way, and about staking coming up down the roadmap, and also about this like bond that a compute runner would have.
Yeah, these are great questions, and I know a lot of people in the Lumen community have been asking these questions as well. So the first easy low hanging fruit here is we're not doing an incentivized test net. It's simply if you want to get involved and you want to test out the software, there is a natural opportunity for first movers here, for people that want to get involved with working on the node, that want to get involved with being a compute provider early on. Obviously, they're going to be first in line for the production launch because they've already been in working with the system. So there's actually been a lot of different AI projects that have approached us saying, hey, we would like to use Morpheus behind our AI project. How do we get involved? So no inherent incentives, but obviously lots of opportunity. Now, as far as staking more, so we're going to be using staked more as a economic and alignment of interests. So we do not have slashing mechanisms in place because that starts getting very gamey, and you start having to have governance layers around slashing. Our goal is to minimize the governance aspects and keep it as lightweight as possible. So we're going to be setting staking thresholds in order to register in these different contracts as a provider or registering a model or an agent. And in order to keep yourself registered, you will have to keep more than staked, which is an opportunity cost because we know, according to the Yellowstone paper, that just holding more in your wallet allows you daily compute. So you are cannibalizing your compute opportunity every day to stay on the provider registry, to stay in the model registry. So there is a cost there. And we believe that's enough of an economic incentive and economic alignment to keep people as good actors initially. Obviously, as we see different patterns emerge with the community and users, we can adjust accordingly. But this is the current model. Now, as far as staking rewards and having a yield on your staked more, there's this is a hard one because there are natural patterns there. Anytime you have a staked system and you have a reward like on the other side of that system, so a provider reward, if you will, there will be a natural progression to gaming that system of how do I spoof being a provider in order to earn the reward from that stake. So this is going to be a natural pattern we see. We're not naive to it, and we're not actually even trying to fight against it. We're acknowledging it and trying to design the system in a way that it economically disincentivizes someone from gaming it. And we do believe that compute is going to be one of the most valuable resources in the near future, if not already. And moving forward, it's going to become more and more valuable. So cannibalizing your own compute will most likely over time just naturally become more expensive than trying to actually sell off the compute to someone that would want to use it. So all that to say, there will be people out there that will set up fake providers, and they will most likely start acquiring more to get a portion of that daily compute drop in order to cannibalize their compute into their fake provider. And that model would actually provide a pseudo stake more, get daily yield type system. So there is a natural path there that could be set up. And we're not, as I said, we're not building against that, but we do believe that the economic alignment will prove that to be not a very lucrative model for people. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, but right now, the way we're looking at it, we don't believe it's going to be super profitable for people to do that.
All right, thank you, Ryan. And a few more questions related to that is, will someone be able to train models? Like, what is the process of someone training a model to do something? This is, can we provide rewards? What is the process of someone, like, let's say they have some compute and they want to train a model? You mentioned having these different kind of tiers of staking to keep your model registered. What would be the flow of someone that says, hey, I have some, code that I want to do, I want to make this model do, and I want to submit it as an agent? What do you think that flow would be for that person to get that agent live and for have it to start grabbing compute from the nodes?
That's a tough one. The
And if it's too early
obviously
for
we
that kind of thing too, we can like
well,
put it on the side.
yeah, it is early, but I will say the general mindset around that is we want it to be as easy as a flow as possible. We want it to be a lightweight lift, and we want it to be private. So if you are training a model or you're training an agent, we want to make sure that that is, obviously falls under our core beliefs, which is at the top of our architecture document, of making sure that it is private and it's not, traced back to the user that's actually doing the training. So long story short, it is a bit early. We don't have the flow fully hammered out yet. It is designed into the smart contracts for the registry, so it is there. But we're maybe maybe 4 or 5 months out from having that system fully nailed down.
Right. And I think that's a totally fair answer, because a lot of this is still in development and we're seeing, really unique and novel ways to go about things emerging. Sorry if there's any background broken. So I'm gonna take a few more questions that we have from the server, and then I think there are a few in the chat. And then we're around half an hour, so we'll let some people come up on stage. This is a kind of a general question, but is why, well, like, two things. One, will this model of decentralized compute be cheaper than centralized compute? I think this is a issue with it's just something that comes up with distributing computing, which many projects have been trying to work on for a long time even. One of them is like Sia, which is an old decentralized storage. I think this idea has been around for a while. It's not something brand new, but Morpheus provides another aspect of it, which is connecting with LLMs, connecting with the AI. So, do you think that decentralized compute will be cheaper? And in that regard, why should a project want to launch with more? Like, what is in their benefit to do that?
So if I could just cover this one a little bit, it's important to understand that it's already there, right? If you look at GPUs on Akash, they're a fraction of the cost if you put them on AWS or if you paid for inference from somebody like OpenAI, right? So it's already there. I've seen different estimates that it's like 3x cheaper already. So we're seeing decentralized compute networks definitely outperform centralized ones, right? Because OpenAI way marks up their APIs like 10x their actual cost, right? And now that the open source models like Llama 3 have caught up with ChatGPT 4, it's like, why would I use OpenAI when I can have basically the same performance from Llama 3 and either run it on my own hardware or use one of these decentralized AI networks? Right. So it's already there. But it's important for people to understand that Morpheus is not supplying the compute. Morpheus is consuming the compute, right? The smart agents are using the model. The smart agents are demanding the inference. Whereas Akash or BitTensor, any of those groups, they're supplying that compute. So it's two sides of the same market, right? And so if you love Akash or BitTensor, great, you should love Morpheus because it's building real world demand for what they're supplying, right? So it's just helpful to kind of understand where things fall in the tech stack. Just wanted to interject that real quick.
Yeah, I would follow on that. And those are great points, David. We're not a competitor to Akash. We're not a competitor to these compute providers. If you'll look at our architecture, The Morpheus network itself revolves around this proxy routing system. All the other pieces that connect to that proxy router are swappable. So the AI engine is fully swappable. So you could run a hyperbolic, you could run a Kosh, you could run whatever you want behind it. The wallet itself is swappable. So you don't have to use the built-in wallet. You could connect MetaMask, you can connect whatever wallet you want. And once again, the UI is swappable. And that's where we're going to see probably a lot of iterations by the community, Venice.ai being one of the UIs that will sit on top of the Morpheus network. So our goal initially with the Morpheus node is really this interconnective piece that ties all this stuff together into one economic system. Now, to actually answer your question more directly about the centralized versus decentralized compute, typically when you look at a system, a centralized system is typically faster, cheaper, higher optimization. That's just the benefits you get when you centralize something. A decentralized system is exactly the opposite. It's typically more expensive. It's typically slower. It's typically a lower, less optimized, we'll say. And then when you start moving into a blockchain system, you have incredible amounts of data redundancy. That's exactly what a blockchain is everyone has a copy of the ledger. So it's incredibly inefficient. So when it comes to is decentralized compute going to outperform or be cheaper than centralized compute, according to those basic patterns that we see, the answer would always be no. But you have this element of free market added in there, where you have anyone around the world has compute that they could put up for sale. You have a global market now that are competing against centralized large institutions that have been controlling the system. So, the person that's running GPUs in the middle of Southeast Asia does not need to have a high profit margin like an Amazon data center has to have. So OpenAI is going to need to have a lot larger profit margin. A publicly traded company is going to have to be showing a lot larger profit. So eventually what will happen is they won't be able to compete with the compute resources of something like the Morpheus network, simply because we can outmaneuver them and we can undercut them in pricing. It's going to be a very, very interesting dynamic. I don't have all the answers, but I'm looking at it, scratching my head, going, well, this is going to be fun to watch.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, David, too. That's a very interesting point about that margin of where someone needs to be profitable. If we're just an individual at home and we have a computer running, that maybe we're not using up to 60% of the compute power, the other day. Maybe we're, watching a video, doing something, but there's a lot of compute lying around. I think that's one of the key elements of the distributed computing is because it's spread out between so many people. It's also the liveliness is quite high because anybody can start tapping in and providing that compute. But that's a good point you brought, that the requirements from that person is much smaller, a smaller electric bill. They're not paying for a whole warehouse filled with servers, and they're not paying like a cooling tank to cool the servers. So there is another dynamic that's maybe not purely calculated in like not only if the cost of it is cheaper or not, but is that opportunity cost much lower than in a big server, and
Right.
that kind of if you had anything else you want to add, I also want to invite people, if you want to come up and ask some questions, feel free to raise your hand. Let me get to some of those as well.
I was just going to say real fast that we see this model in the Bitcoin mining world, that if you take a person at home with a miner in their garage and you give them 3-cent electricity, their profit margin is actually going to be a lot higher than if you go to a large miner in the middle of Texas that has 3-cent electricity, because the OpEx is just completely different. And that's what we're going to see with a decentralized compute ecosystem like Morpheus.
Very nice.
Yeah.
David,
The only other thing I was going to add is if a bunch of people here in the audience plan on being compute providers, you should think specifically on the tech side about which model you want to offer, right? Because that'll drive your specs. Like Ryan said, it's a free market. You could be offering Llama 3 8 billion parameter, right? Which takes 16 gigs or whatever of RAM. you could be offering the 70 billion parameter version, right? Right now, Llama is training a 400 billion parameter version. So those are very different hardware setups. So, but it's driven by what you want to offer to the market, and it'll be interesting to see what sort of which models are most popular, right? There's the Noose Hermes fine tune of Llama 3. I see that's one of the defaults that Venice.ai is offering. There's stable diffusion models, right, for images. There's all these different things that you could offer. So it'd be really interesting to see, but that'll probably drive, like, based on your hardware, what size of a model you can offer.
If I really wanted to, I could offer Llama 70B on my phone, but it would be a really bad idea because it would sink the reputation of my registered provider very, very quickly. So it's we want to keep it open, we want to keep it free, but we're building in the system in a way that would disincentivize people from offering bad service.
Very nice, and I think it's really cool to see how that's going to play out with these different levels. That there can be, the community builds things to say, hey, if you have around this specs, maybe this suggested thing you offer is this and this. So there could even be kind of dashboards and systems to help guide people with what they have and what they could potentially get and provide. I thought we had someone come up on stage, but I'm not seeing them. TMW, did you fall out? I think they fell out. Again, if anybody wants to come up on stage and ask a question, or if you're shy, you can just type the question and we'll get to it. If you typed it before, just feel free to do it again. There was a whole list of questions that I probably glossed over a bit. And another question I had for you two is, how do you, with this idea of compute and different people all over the world, different time zones, different, lifestyles, how do we feel about like liveliness and being able to guarantee that the project is staying online, that it's possible, for guaranteeing uptime, preventing like unstable or suddenly offline compute providers? Is it kind of, we got, hey, Mystics, is it this mechanism of disincentivizing poor behavior? Is there something else behind that? That was another question that had come up in the
So once again, this comes from kind of a reputation mechanic. So as more users use you as a provider, and the longer they keep their session open with you, those are positive indicators. It's like if you jump into a taxi cab and they're going 5 miles an hour and all these cars around you are just like whizzing by at 60, 70 miles an hour. You're just like, man, what am I paying this taxi cab driver per second for when he's going 5 miles an hour on the interstate? Either you're going to jump out of the car, tuck and roll, and get out of there as fast as possible, or you're going to ask him to stop and you get out, you'll pay him, and then find a better taxi cab. Eventually, if that taxi cab has a public leaderboard that shows how many successful trips they have completed, this taxi cab most likely will have 0 completed trips, and people will stop selecting them. And this is very similar to what we're building into the marketplace, where you can bid on how much you're going to charge to offer a model on a decentralized ecosystem, but it's only going to be your reputation score that keeps you at the top of the list.
Very cool. Yeah, there's a lot of really cool dynamics, and that's a great analogy with the taxi. That over time, it's the performance and the kind of fidelity of what you're offering and what you can provide that will determine this. We have a question about the token in general. Is the community going to be reaching out to centralized exchanges to try to get listed, or will the centralized exchanges have to basically DYO or like do it on their own and buy a certain amount of token? Because I mean, if you guys look in the tokenomics, there is no free mine, there is no amount set aside for community grant and developers, and then an amount set aside for centralized exchange listing. So the question in the community is, how may that look on the token side with centralized exchanges? Is there going to be anybody trying to approach them to do it, or is it going to be, hey, if you think this is valid, just buy the token and that's it?
So, happy to speak about that. Personally, I'm really happy that Morpheus started fully decentralized and it has most of its liquidity on DEXs because it's a lot less risky for the average person, right? I mean, I try to remind people most of the centralized exchanges I've ever used are no longer around. Like Mt. Gox is gone, BitInstant is gone, FTX is gone. Like these centralized groups fail all the time because they require all this trust. Sometimes it's an issue with regulation. Sometimes, like in the case of FTX, there was fraud. Like I would much rather hold my own private keys and just use a DEX. And given how fast the DEXs have gotten, how good the liquidity is, how low the fees are now on Arbitrum, I mean, to me, it's a no brainer. And as the more token gets deployed on Ethereum and Base and Polygon and Solana, I think we're going to see a lot more trading pools and dexes pick it up. So I'll start by saying that, but yeah, it's kind of like Bitcoin. How does an exchange list Bitcoin? They just do it, right? It's an More is an ERC20. So it's a super standard contract format that all the exchanges support. And, they can see all the public audits. Like a lot of the things on their checklist are like, has this contract been audited? Is the tech legit? Does it have, good code, right? And Morpheus is 7 audits in. You guys probably saw the Open Zeppelin audit report that they put up on their blog for MOR. And so, like it should check all those boxes. But, honestly, it's usually not a good sign when a project has to pay some centralized exchange a fee and, line up a market maker who just dumps on the community anyway. Right. They should list it because they think it's going to benefit their users. Right. And that's what legit exchanges do. Right. Coinbase doesn't charge fees. Kraken doesn't charge fees. Like, they go through a process. If there's demand, they list it. Right. It's the lower tier exchanges that want you to, play that game and, pay a fee and do all this. And honestly, I don't even think it's healthy or good for projects. Right. So I'm really glad it started decentralized. I'm sure inevitably, centralized exchanges will list it, but it's got to be an organic process. And Morpheus is just not the kind of project that's going to play that game or send a bunch of money to some exchange to get listed. I think those are actually negative signals in the market.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on this one. I feel very strongly about this piece too. I've been a part of a lot of projects over the years, and I've seen the exchanges charging anywhere from 500, as low as $200,000 up to $1 million, and sometimes more for a listing fee. And then they come back around as like a marketing fee, and then they'll start like if your coin is underperforming, then they'll try to get more money out of your project to try to keep it listed. And it's when a centralized exchange starts using their business model as milking funds out of a protocol project, it becomes very predatory. And seeing this throughout the years has kind of put a bad taste in my mouth. And I'll echo what David said. Like, I love the fact that Morpheus launched in a decentralized ecosystem and is still in a decentralized ecosystem. And I wish it would stay like this, like perfect, honestly, just, from my perspective, because to me that's healthy. But I know eventually the trading volume will get large enough on Uniswap and these other dexes that the exchanges won't be able to resist listing it because they're missing out on a ton of trading fees. So I think it will be a natural progression where the token will get enough volume and the exchanges will automatically start wanting to list it. But it's really hard to go through due diligence on a project that doesn't have a company, that doesn't have executives, that doesn't have, they try to do KYC AML. I'm like, okay, who are you going to do it on? It's a Morpheus community. So you either list the token or you don't. So we'll see when, how, and if it gets listed on central exchanges. I'm sure it will eventually because they are in the business of making money off of popular tokens. So I think it will happen naturally, though.
Thank you about that. Oh yeah, Mystic, do you want to add in more?
No, not much to say. I think you covered. I mean, the reality of it this was a merger of two things: the computing and coding people with the guys that are the pros at the crypto, and that merger is beautiful because that's what we want. We want to be able to create a symbiosis between real world processes and digitized processes in a safe and efficient manner, which is what this accomplishes.